Hello, everyone. The 13th century, an age when the Mongol Empire cast its shadow from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, and few dared to stand against the storm. Kingdoms burned, citadels crumbled, and the sound of hooves thundered across continents. Yet amid the small land called Đại Việt, sheltered by mountains and rivers of the south, one man rose, not to conquer, but to endure. His name was Trần Hưng Đạo, the guardian of a nation that refused to kneel. Born in an age of turmoil, he carried within him both the pride of nobility and the burden of vengeance. His father's honor was stolen, his family watched with suspicion, his heart carved with resentment. But from the fire of hatred, he forged something greater: loyalty. He learned that devotion to the nation must stand above devotion to blood. When the Mongol Yuan armies swept through Asia, burning and consuming all in their path, Đại Việt stood alone, on the edge of survival. Against hundreds of thousands of seasoned invaders, Trần Hưng Đạo commanded an army of farmers, monks, and fishermen, men who fought not for glory, but for home. He possessed no grand armies, no treasures, no walled fortresses, but he held something stronger, the unity of a people who believed. Beneath his banner, the Red River ran crimson with the fall of giants. On the waters of Bac Dang, he turned the tide itself into a weapon, and patience into victory. His strategy, the art of wielding wind as blade and water as fortress, remains studied by generals to this day. To the Mongols, he was a phantom, a southern storm that struck and vanished. To his people, he was the living spirit of Đại Việt, the man who could turn despair into faith. His proclamation to the generals stands as one of history's greatest testaments to patriotism, not a cry of hatred, but a voice of conviction, not a summons to die, but a call to live with honor. While the enemy still stands, how can we rest? He asked, a question that awakened the soul of a nation. Under his command, Đại Việt achieved what no other Asian kingdom had done. It defeated the Mongol Empire 3 times. And when triumph was his, he sought no throne, claimed no crown, accepting only the name given by his people, Duc Than Tran, the saint of the nation. Though his body returned to dust, his legend did not fade. His temples became sanctuaries. Sailors called upon his name before storms. Soldiers prayed to him before battle. They believed his spirit still rode the wind, guarding the rivers, the mountains, and the heart of Vietnam. Through the centuries, empires have risen and fallen, yet his name still echoes like thunder across the land. Trần Hưng Đạo, the man who proved that the true strength of a nation lies not in the sword, but in the will that never yields. The year was 1228. In a land hemmed between mountains and sea, where mists curled like living things and rivers breathed with the rhythm of the earth, a child was born, Trần Quoc Tuan. To the world it was the birth of another noble heir. To fate it was the forging of a blade. He was born into the house of Trần Lưu, a prince by blood, but a wounded man by destiny. His father had lost his wife, his love, and his pride to his own brother, the Emperor Trần Thái Tông. It was not merely a matter of family, it was betrayal sanctified by the crown. And from that wound, silence spread like a scar through generations. The boy grew among whispers. Servants bowed but dared not meet his gaze. Courtiers smiled, but their eyes held pity. Even the wind that passed through the palace seemed to carry 2 names, Thái Tông and Liu, bound forever in uneasy balance. Quoc Tuan, the young prince, was quick to learn that in the palace, words were weapons and silence was armor. He spoke little. He watched everything. While other boys played with wooden swords, he studied the art of stillness, the pause before the strike, the discipline before the storm. His father, once a proud general, never fully recovered from the wound of the throne. On his deathbed, as incense hung heavy in the air, Trần Lư gripped his son's wrist and whispered, "Our blood was wronged. If you can take the throne, take it. If not, avenge me." The hall fell silent. Outside, the Red River flowed as it always had, calm, indifferent, eternal. The boy looked upon his father's lifeless form and felt the weight of generations pressing upon his chest. But even in grief, something within him resisted. He did not promise vengeance. He did not promise power. He made a vow only to himself. "I will not destroy my nation to heal a wound. I will save it, so that no wound like this need be made again." That night the world changed for him. He no longer saw power as a right, but as a responsibility, a flame that could warm or consume, depending on the hand that held it. Years passed. The boy grew into a man whose presence commanded silence. He trained his body with the soldiers, his mind with the scholars, and his soul with the land itself. He learned that the mountains could be patient, that rivers never fought yet always conquered, that time itself could wear down stone. While princes of other lands dreamed of gold and conquest, he walked the rice fields barefoot, listening to the rhythm of the people, the hum of life beneath the noise of court. He saw the farmers who bent their backs not out of weakness, but endurance. He watched fishermen brave monsoon tides, monks carve wisdom into silence. And in them he saw the soul of Đại Việt, a people who endured storms not by defying them, but by flowing with them. He came to understand that the land was not his to rule. It was his to protect, and protection demanded both the heart of a father and the patience of the earth. By his 30s, Trần Quoc Tuan had become something more than a noble. He was a scholar of war, a man who read not just books, but landscapes. He studied Sun Tzu and Wu Qi, but also the quiet language of the Red River's tides. He saw how water turned to power when guided by form, and how armies could move like rivers, calm, unstoppable, and shaped by unseen depths. He rose in rank not through title, but through understanding. The soldiers trusted him because he did not order them. He led them. He slept among them, ate their food, and shared their silence. They said his eyes could see both a man's weakness and his courage in the same glance. In a time when princes ruled from behind silk curtains, he stood beneath the open sky. And when he rode across the fields of Thăng Long, the peasants looked up and whispered his name as if it were both prayer and promise. Yet peace, as it often does, was only the space between storms. Far beyond the northern mountains, the Mongol Empire grew restless. They had already devoured China, Korea, and much of the known world. Their banners, black horses, iron bows, and endless ambition moved like thunder across Asia. From the court of Kublai Khan, son of heaven and ruler of half the earth, came the word that would chill every nation beneath the sky: surrender or be erased. And in the halls of Thăng Long, that word arrived like an echo from the edge of the world. Some ministers trembled. Others whispered that Đại Việt was too small, too fragile, too far from heaven's favor to resist. But in the midst of fear, one man remained still. Trần Quoc Tuan listened to the counsel of the court, and then to the silence between their words. He saw not fear, but blindness, the blindness of those who had forgotten the strength that flowed in their rivers and their people. He returned to his estate in Van Keep, where the rivers met like converging destinies. There he began to prepare, not for battle, but for understanding. He studied the tides, the terrain, the movement of wind through valleys, the rise and fall of flood seasons. He walked the banks of the Bắc Giang River at dawn, tracing its curves like the lines of a blade yet to be drawn. And when his generals asked what he saw, he said only, "A map written by the earth itself. We only need to learn how to read it." By then he was no longer merely Tran Quoc Tuan, son of a wronged prince. He had become something else, a man shaped by patience, by silence, by purpose, a commander not born of ambition, but of necessity, a vessel through which a nation's will began to find its voice. And though the storm from the north had not yet reached his borders, its thunder was already in his heart. He knew what was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the trembling of leaves, in the stillness before the rain. The world would call it invasion. He would call it destiny, and when the first hoof of the Mongol horse struck the soil of Đại Việt, the land did not tremble, for it had already chosen its defender. Before the thunder comes the silence. For years Đại Việt waited, not in fear, but in preparation. The Mongol shadow grew longer with every sunrise, yet in that shadow, Trần Hưng Đạo began to craft something invisible, something the enemy could not burn or break. Unity. He understood that survival was not born from walls, but from hearts that beat together. So he built his nation as one would build an army, brick by brick, soul by soul. Where others saw peasants, he saw sentinels. Where others saw fishermen, he saw guardians of rivers. Where others saw silence, he heard the murmurs of faith. In the mornings, he walked among the fields of Thăng Long. He watched the farmers bend beneath the weight of the harvest, and he saw in their motion the same rhythm that drove an army's march. He spoke little, but when his eyes met theirs, they straightened, as if reminded that their labor was no less sacred than the swing of a sword. He reorganized the provinces, not as territories, but as arteries of a living body. From the northern highlands to the southern delta, every village became a nerve of awareness, every waterway a line of defense. He taught his commanders not only how to command men, but how to listen, to the land, to the wind, to the silence before the storm. Under his guidance, carpenters became engineers, monks became strategists, fishermen became scouts. When a storm was coming, the people would say, "The general has taught us how to fight without fighting." And it was true. Trần Hưng Đạo genius lay not in brute force, but in the art of waiting. He once told his captains, "A sword that strikes too soon cuts nothing but air." They did not fully understand him then, but the land did. He turned his attention to the rivers, the veins of Đại Việt. While others fortified castles, he fortified the flow of water itself. He studied the rise and fall of tides, the shifting of sandbanks, the way the moon pulled the rivers like invisible reins. He saw that nature itself was a strategist, and so he listened. At night, under lantern light, he drew lines on parchment, not borders but currents, predicting where the Mongol fleets would drift, where they would falter, where the tides would betray them. He believed that victory belonged not to the strongest arm, but to the one who moved with the pulse of the world. In the villages, rumors spread like quiet hope. They said the general could see the future in the river's reflection. When the wind turned north, he would nod and murmur, "Soon." When the rains came early, he would say, "The earth is sharpening itself." It was not superstition. It was calculation dressed in patience. And as he worked, the empire around him began to transform. Blacksmiths forged plowshares that could become spears overnight. Boatmen learned to fight in silence, oars moving like whispers. Every tool, every trade, every hand found its place in his invisible design. A fisherman could carry a message faster than a soldier. A monk could hide an army within a prayer. It was not an army of conquest. It was an army of endurance. When word reached Thăng Long that the Mongols had conquered Song China, the court fell into panic. Ministers wept, merchants fled, nobles debated surrender. But Trần Hưng Đạo did not argue. He only asked one question. If we surrender now, who will we become? The silence that followed was the beginning of courage. He then ordered that every bridge along the Red River be marked, every forest path recorded, every tide measured. Not a soldier moved without purpose, not a boat sailed without reason. The nation itself became a trap, silent, breathing, waiting. When his advisers questioned why he would not attack first, he replied, "Because the tide must rise before it can break." He had no need for glory. He was not building a war, he was building inevitability. Seasons passed. The people began to sense the storm long before they saw it. Birds flew lower, winds grew dry, and the northern sky darkened with distant dust, the dust of hooves. In the temples, monks lit incense and whispered his name as they prayed for the nation's soul. In the villages, old men sharpened bamboo stakes, children fetched water, women wove banners. And in the midst of that quiet fervor, Trần Hưng Đạo walked the banks of the Bắc Giang once more. The river was calm, reflecting the red dusk like blood across glass. He placed his hand upon the water and said softly, "Not yet." He turned to his aides. "The enemy must first see victory before they taste defeat." They looked at him, puzzled, but he said no more. The tide would explain the rest in time. Under the dim glow of twilight, he wrote in his own hand, "A river may seem soft, yet it wears down mountains. Strength lies not in the strike, but in the waiting." Those who read his words did not know they were reading the heart of a strategy that would one day break an empire. To the world he appeared still, an old man by a river. But beneath the surface, every drop of water was moving, every current obeying the rhythm he had foreseen. The art of endurance had begun. The year 1258. The mountains of the north trembled. A curtain of dust rose over the borderlands, the breath of the Mongol horse. For the first time, the thunder that had crushed kingdoms from the Pacific to the Danube rolled toward Đại Việt. They came like the storm's front, swift, disciplined, and merciless. Beneath their banners rode Uriyankadai, son of the great Subutai, the ghost of empires past. His armies were the perfection of terror. Iron-hooved cavalry, seasoned archers, and war drums that could be heard miles before the first arrow fell. The emperor's court shook. The sound of fear moved faster than any messenger. But far from the capital, in his quiet command at Van Keep, Trần Hưng Đạo already knew. He had been watching the sky. The birds had fled too soon. The rivers had turned cold too early. Nature whispered what men refused to say. The storm has come. In the first days, the Mongols advanced with ease. They took the northern strongholds, Lang Son, Thanh Nguyen, and the border passes, like a knife cutting silk. Their speed was overwhelming, their discipline absolute. But Trần Hưng Đạo had no intention of stopping them. He did not fight the flood. He guided it. He ordered a retreat southward, burning granaries, sinking boats, clearing fields. It was a retreat that was not defeat, but design. The land was stripped bare, the rivers left empty. The Mongols pursued, triumphant and hungry, never realizing they were chasing ghosts through a hollowed land. In the court of Thăng Long, panic reigned. Ministers begged to surrender. The emperor wavered. But then, as dawn broke over the citadel, Trần Hưng Đạo entered the hall. His armor was plain, his face calm, his words measured. "If you wish to yield," he said, "then let me march first. When my head falls, you may surrender the land." The silence that followed was sharper than any sword. No one dared to speak again of giving up. By the time the Mongols reached Thăng Long, the city was empty. The wind moved through deserted streets, carrying the smell of ash and salt. There were no soldiers waiting, no walls to storm, only silence and eyes watching from the rivers beyond. When the invaders feasted on abandoned supplies, they did not notice the faint shift in the tides. When they rested, they did not see the stakes buried beneath the water, and when they drank from the wells, they did not taste the poison. The first ambush came at dawn. A light mist hovered over the Khao River. The Mongol vanguard, confident and unaware, crossed in tight formation. Then the fog erupted. Fire arrows, drums, the crash of water as hidden boats surged from the reeds. Within moments, the crossing was chaos. Those who fled found the bridges gone, their paths swallowed by flame. It was not a battle, it was a lesson, and the lesson was patience. For weeks, Trần Hưng Đạo struck and vanished. He moved his forces like shadows, never holding ground, never repeating a pattern. At times the Mongols thought they had cornered him, only to find themselves encircled instead. Their strength became their weakness, their speed, their blindness. They fought an enemy who was never where they expected, yet always exactly where he chose to be. The rivers became his soldiers, the forests became his allies. Every tide, every gust of wind, every foot of soil was a silent accomplice. His officers asked when they would attack in full. He replied, "When the river commands it." They waited, and so did he. Winter passed. The Mongols, unaccustomed to the heat and humidity, began to falter. Their horses thinned, their arrows warped with moisture. The land that once yielded grain now gave only mud and fever. And still the phantom army of Đại Việt refused to face them directly. By the spring of 1258, Uriankadai had no choice but to withdraw. His army, once proud, limped northward through the same empty plains they had conquered. Behind them, the Red River flowed crimson in the morning light, not from battle, but from exhaustion, from the slow bleeding of arrogance. When the last of their banners vanished beyond the mountains, Trần Hưng Đạo did not celebrate. He gave no speeches, claimed no triumph. He only said to his aides, "They will return. Next time the storm will come with thunder." And he was right. In the years that followed, Đại Việt rebuilt, but not in complacency. Under his direction, villages fortified their fields, river defenses were expanded, and secret forges produced thousands of iron-tipped stakes. Each one was a promise that the next storm would not find the land unprepared. He turned victory into discipline, and discipline into doctrine. He taught that survival was not the absence of defeat, but the mastery of time. For in the eyes of Trần Hưng Đạo, endurance was victory delayed, not denied. When word reached him that Kublai Khan had ascended the throne in the north, the general stood on the banks of the Bakjang once more. The tide was rising, the river swelling with evening light. He watched the current twist and said quietly, "Then so must we." The river answered with its eternal song, a whisper of patience, of rhythm, of power that waits until it must no longer wait. The first storm had passed, but in its wake a greater one was gathering, and the man who could read the river was already reading destiny. 27 years had passed since the first storm. The world had changed, but not the hunger of empires. From the palaces of Khanbalik, where silk and gold veiled the will of conquest, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis himself, turned his gaze once more toward the south. The memory of failure was a wound to his pride, a wound that demanded blood. He would not send a mere vanguard this time. He would send the empire. The message arrived in Thăng Long like thunder rolling from the north. Its words were simple: submit or be destroyed. The court was divided. Some ministers, pale with fear, whispered that resistance was folly. Others spoke of surrender as diplomacy, calling it wisdom in the face of heaven. But when the emperor looked to Trần Hưng Đạo, the general said only, "If the enemy demands that we kneel, then our answer must be the sound of steel. Yet even as he spoke, he knew what was coming. This would not be a raid, it would be annihilation. By the winter of 1284, the Mongol banners were already in motion. Two great armies, more than 500,000 strong, advanced like twin storms. From the north, Thoat Hoan, Kublai's son, marched down through the passes of Lang Son with an army of veterans, Chinese, Mongol, Korean. From the south, Toa Jo, the iron-fisted general of the Yuan, sailed from Champa with a fleet that would choke the southern seas. Between them lay only one land, Đại Việt, small, green, and terribly alone. When word reached Van Keep, Trần Hưng Đạo stood upon the river-bank, watching the cold mist rise from the water. He did not curse the heavens. He did not pray. He simply whispered, "It begins." The invasion struck like lightning. From the northern front, Thoat Hoan's army swept through Cao Bang, Lang Son, Van Keep, cutting through fortresses like parchment. To the south, Toa Jo captured the coast and began to march northward. Within weeks, the two armies sought to crush Đại Việt between them, the jaws of a colossal trap. The emperor fled the capital. Thăng Long fell, its palaces stripped, its streets empty. The Mongols believed the war was won. But what they had conquered was only space, not resolve. The people melted into the forests, the marshes, the rivers, becoming ghosts, eyes and whispers in the mist. Every village burned became a trap. Every retreat was a reloading of will. And at the heart of that silence moved one mind, deliberate, invisible, unbroken. Trần Hưng Đạo knew that strength could not meet strength. He knew the empire's weight could crush armies, but not time. So he wove chaos into strategy. He ordered feigned retreats, drawing the Mongols deeper and deeper into the Red River Delta, where the land turned to water and the air itself became a weapon. His soldiers struck like lightning, appearing, vanishing, reappearing from the mist, each strike small, each retreat purposeful, every moment bending the enemy's patience toward collapse. When the court despaired, he gathered his generals and spoke words that would burn through the centuries. Our enemy is fierce, yet their hearts are far from home. We are weak, yet our land itself fights for us. Victory does not belong to the one who strikes first, but to the one who endures last. Those who heard him felt their fear harden into belief. Meanwhile, in the occupied north, Thoat Hoan grew impatient. The land yielded nothing, no food, no loyalty, only silence. The rivers refused his ships, the rains drowned his camps. His men began to starve, to fall ill, to lose faith. And through the darkness came whispers of the phantom general, a man the locals said could command the wind, who could turn rivers against armies. Then came the night of Zhongbo Jiao. Under the cover of fog, the Mongol garrison stationed near the capital found itself surrounded. Drums thundered from every direction. Torches lit the horizon like dawn breaking from the earth itself. The soldiers panicked. From the marshes came thousands of men, barefoot, silent, fierce. They struck with precision, disappeared before the counterattack, and struck again. By sunrise, the camp was ash. When reports reached Thoat Hoan, he refused to believe them. "Impossible," he said. They were defeated. But as more messages arrived, each marked by loss, each heavier than the last, disbelief turned to dread. South of the Delta, Toa Jo's forces pressed north, burning and killing as they went. He expected to unite with Thoat Hoan and crush the fleeing Vietnamese between them. But the land betrayed him. Rains flooded the plains, food vanished, and every river crossing seemed to whisper the same name, Hung Jiao Vuong. The two Mongol armies, vast and mighty, were now trapped in a labyrinth of mud, hunger, and ghosts. Then came the counterstroke. Trần Hưng Đạo, after months of waiting, ordered his forces to converge. From the mountains came Tran Quang Kai. From the coast, the southern armies advanced, and from the heart of the mist, the general himself emerged, calm, silent, eyes fixed north. The trap closed. At Tai Ket, Toa Jo's army was surrounded. Cut off from reinforcements, he fought until his banner fell. His head was taken to the emperor as proof, not of revenge, but of balance restored. Thoat Hoan, realizing the scale of his defeat, fled north in panic. He abandoned his soldiers, disguising himself to escape through the forests. But the land remembered. Every path he took was lined with arrows. Every bridge he crossed burned behind him. He survived, barely, crawling back across the border like a ghost fleeing the light. When the last of the enemy vanished beyond the mountains, Jai Viet breathed again. The fields were scorched, the rivers red, the people weary, but they still stood. Against the greatest empire the world had known, they had not yielded an inch of soul. The court wept in gratitude. The emperor offered Hung Zhao the throne, saying, "The nation is yours. You have saved it." But the general bowed deeply and replied, "The nation is not mine to own. It belongs to those who died that it might live." And then he walked away. Back to the rivers. Back to silence. In the years that followed, the Mongols would return once more, for pride never learns. But the land would remember this storm. It had endured the empire of empires, not with iron, but with will. And at its heart stood one man, calm as the mountains, sharp as the tide, who had turned endurance into art and patience into power. Tran Hung Zhao, the guardian of the South, the man who taught an empire that not all victories are won by conquest, some are won by refusing to fall. The third storm came not as thunder, but as prophecy fulfilled. For years, Tran Hung Zhao had warned that the empire would return. Now the horizon itself darkened with their sails. From the Gulf of Tonkin to the Red River's mouth, 500 warships advanced, their black banners blotting out the sun. Kublai Khan, relentless in pride, had sent his own son Togon to command the invasion, alongside the seasoned General Omar. They called it Heaven's Vengeance. But the heavens, as it would soon be proven, had already chosen their champion. The Mongols came with fury and arrogance. They had learned from their past defeats, or so they believed. They brought siege engines, new ships, and men enough to swallow nations. The north burned once more. The capital was evacuated again. But beneath the smoke, something unseen was moving, a pattern traced years before. In the stillness of Van Keep, Tran Hung Zhao gathered his captains. The general was older now, his beard white as salt, his armor plain as stone. Yet his eyes, calm and fierce, held the same storm as before. He looked to the river charts spread before him, the tides, the depths, the flow of Bach Jang. Every curve of water was memorized, every secret known. He pointed to the tide marks drawn in ink and said quietly, "This river remembers, and now it will speak." In the early months of 1288, Togon's forces swept south again, burning and taking everything in their path. Villages were emptied, fields destroyed. When the Mongols reached Thang Long, they found it deserted, again. To them it was déjà vu. To Tran Hung Zhao it was design repeated. But this time the trap was grander than before. The general ordered that the Mongols be allowed to advance unhindered, deeper, always deeper, until the land itself would turn against them. Bridges collapsed behind them, roads vanished into marshland. Their food supply, carried by ships along the coast, was silently cut off by Vietnamese raiders. The empire's might began to starve upon the water. Weeks passed. The Mongol soldiers, hungry and restless, scoured the countryside for grain, finding nothing but ashes and whispers. The once disciplined army grew desperate. And still no sign of Tran Hung Zhao. He was everywhere and nowhere. A rumor in the mist, a whisper in the tide. While the Mongols fought ghosts, the general's true army was at work, beneath the river. For months, under the cover of night, thousands of men labored in silence. They carved iron-tipped wooden stakes, each taller than a man, and drove them deep into the muddy bed of the Bakjang River. By moonlight, they sang quietly as they worked, their songs drowned by the tide. When dawn came, the river appeared calm, as if nothing had changed. But beneath its surface lay a forest of death, waiting for the moment it would rise. Trần Hưng Đạo watched every tide, every phase of the moon. He studied the river not as a weapon, but as a living ally. The tide, he once said, is a general too. It only obeys those who understand it. By late spring, the Mongols had overextended. Their supplies gone, their fleet trapped between hunger and the tide, they turned north to retreat. It was then that Trần Hưng Đạo struck. He sent smaller vessels, swift, maneuverable, to harass the enemy from the front. The Mongols, believing victory near, gave chase. They pursued the retreating boats into the narrow mouth of the Bakjang River. The tide was high. The stakes lay hidden beneath the surface, unseen. As the Mongol fleet advanced, drums echoed from the cliffs. Vietnamese banners flashed through the mist like streaks of flame. And then, silence. The tide began to fall. Slowly the water receded. The hidden stakes rose from the depths like the teeth of a dragon. One by one, the massive Mongol ships splintered and tore upon the iron tips. The river erupted in chaos, shouts, cracking hulls, men leaping into the blood-red current. From both banks, the Jai Viet fleet descended. Flaming arrows rained down, fire ships rammed through the wreckage. The river burned, the empire drowned. Omar, the Mongol general, fell amidst the flames. Togon barely escaped, fleeing into the mountains, his once mighty armada turned to drifting ash. By nightfall, the river was silent again. The stakes stood bare, their iron tips glinting beneath the moonlight, an eternal monument to patience fulfilled. When word reached Kublai Khan, he refused to believe it. His son, defeated, his fleet destroyed by a backwater kingdom. But the truth could not be erased. The greatest war machine in history had met its end, not by armies or empires, but by a single river and a single man who knew how to wait. Trần Hưng Đạo did not celebrate. He walked the banks of the river, now littered with wreckage and corpses. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and smoke. He looked upon the tide and said softly, "This is not victory. This is balance." To him, war was not conquest. It was harmony restored, a storm met by stillness. In the months that followed, Jai Viet rebuilt once more. Fields returned to green. The rivers ran clear again. And yet, the name Bakjang became something sacred, spoken by fishermen as prayer, by soldiers as promise. The people said that on certain nights, when the tide turned, one could still hear the clash of oars and the distant drums of that day. They said the river remembered. And perhaps it did. Because history would remember too, not the might of Kublai's empire, but the patience of a man who turned water into destiny. The Mongols would never return. The empire that once ruled from the Pacific to the Mediterranean had met a power it could not understand, a nation bound not by conquest, but by memory. In the stillness after the final storm, Trần Hưng Đạo returned to his home by the river. He was older now, his strength fading. But when young soldiers came seeking his wisdom, he would point to the water and say, "That is how we fought. Not by anger, not by pride, but by knowing when to move and when to wait." And when he closed his eyes for the last time, the tide was rising. The river flowed as it always had, soft, silent, eternal. It carried his name not as a sound, but as a rhythm, a rhythm that still beats within the heart of Vietnam. The war was over. The rivers, once red with blood, flowed clear again. The drums of battle faded into the whispers of rain. But in the heart of Jai Viet, one name remained, carried by wind, by tide, by the silence of prayer: Trần Hưng Đạo. He had outlived the empire that sought to crush his homeland. He had seen 3 invasions rise and fall like waves upon rock. And yet, when peace returned, he did not crown himself in glory. He returned instead to Van Keep, the land that had known both his victories and his sorrow. In his later years, Trần Hưng Đạo withdrew from the court. He built no palace, sought no wealth. His home was a modest wooden hall beside the river. There, the old general sat beneath the bamboo eaves, watching the water flow past the stakes that had once saved a nation. He was no longer the thunder of war. He had become the stillness after it. Villagers would travel from miles away just to see him, bringing gifts of rice, flowers, or simple questions. "Master," they would ask, "how did we defeat the empire of the north?" And he would smile faintly, his voice soft as the river itself. "We did not defeat them. We endured them." He spoke little of strategy, less of revenge. To him, the greatest victory was peace itself. He told his visitors that strength lay not in swords or spears, but in patience, unity, and memory, the quiet fire that outlasts empires. Though retired, Trần Hưng Đạo continued to teach. Young commanders came seeking his wisdom, men who had grown up hearing of his battles like children hear of legends. He welcomed them, not as soldiers but as sons. He taught them that war was not a game of destruction, but of understanding, that the land itself could be a weapon, and the heart a compass stronger than any map. He spoke of tides and winds, of timing and silence. He said, "The wise general does not force the storm, he becomes it." To those who asked about courage, he replied, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear decide." His words spread far beyond his hall, copied by monks, memorized by scholars, whispered by soldiers on distant posts. And slowly, the legend of the general became a philosophy. When age finally caught up with him, he did not resist it. His hair was white, his voice thin, but his mind still sharp as a drawn blade. When illness came, the emperor himself visited, kneeling before the man who had once saved his throne. "Master," the young ruler said, "what shall we do when you are gone?" Trần Hưng Đạo looked toward the river beyond his window, its tide low, its song soft. He whispered, "When the enemy returns, if my bones have turned to dust, then take that dust and cast it into the river, for even in death I will rise to fight beside you." The emperor wept, and so did every man in the room, for they knew they were hearing not a farewell, but a vow. In the autumn of 1300, as the sun set over Van Keep, the general closed his eyes for the last time. No trumpet sounded, no drum beat. Only the wind moved through the reeds, and the river murmured his name. They buried him simply, as he had wished. No jewels, no banners, only a sword laid across his chest, and the sound of water nearby. But when the people learned of his passing, temples began to rise, not by royal decree, but by love. From the Red River Delta to the mountains of Yen Tu, shrines were built of stone, bamboo, and prayer. Fishermen left offerings before they sailed. Soldiers bowed before battle. Mothers whispered his name when their sons marched to war. They called him Juk Than Tran, the saint of the river and the sword. Centuries passed, empires rose, fell, and were forgotten. But the Bac Giang River still flows, slow, eternal, unchanged. And on misty mornings, when the tide turns and the reeds sway, some say you can hear the faint echo of hooves and drums. not of war, but of vigilance. The fishermen say that when storms gather, a shadow rides upon the wind, a figure in ancient armor standing upon the waves. They say he watches still, guarding the rivers, the mountains, and the heart of Vietnam. Today his name endures not as a relic, but as a rhythm that pulses in every act of courage. Schools bear his name, temples echo his oaths, and in every generation, when the nation trembles, his story returns, not as myth, but as memory reborn. He was not a conqueror. He built no empire, raised no crown. Yet his empire was the people, his throne, the land itself. He proved that greatness is not in ruling others, but in mastering oneself. That victory is not measured by conquest, but by endurance, the power to bend without breaking, to wait without surrendering, to rise again with the tide. And so, as long as rivers flow and winds remember, the spirit of Trần Hưng Đạo shall not fade. He is not gone. He is the breath of the storm, the calm that follows, and the whisper in every heart that refuses to bow. And that was the full story. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories and Documents, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future episodes like this one. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.